Social media is dead. Just joking. Just joking. I am just joking. But people always just love to be saying that things are dead when they're not. They're just changing. I feel like every couple of months it's email is dead, cold calling is dead, video ads are dead, this is dead, but social media is not dead. And in this episode of the Super Fun Marketing Podcast, we're going to talk about basically that. Social media isn't what it used to be, but it's not dead. And I was thinking maybe it's just having a little bit of like a transformation moment. It's evolving. I was thinking about this week, and did you know, this is actually something that my husband told me. Everything eventually evolves into crab. And apparently scientists don't really know like why that's happening. I half fact checked this, but like my husband told me this. He's a pretty reliable source. But yeah, so apparently all of these animals keep evolving into crabs. It's like this next stage of evolution is like a crab body. Yeah, maybe that's what's happening with the social media. But yeah, somebody fact check that and then let me know what the story is here. But back to social media. So I recently posted about this on LinkedIn. In my post, I said that social media is changing and it's evolving and the platforms are changing. But most importantly, what we're going to be talking about as well in this episode is not just that the platforms are changing, but that the way that people are using the platforms are changing as well. And so before I get into that, I'm going to start with a definition like I do almost every episode so far. This is episode 4 of the podcast, but I'm going to start with a definition. The Oxford Dictionary defines social media as websites and applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. And when I was looking at this definition, there are basically, I think, two important parts when I was looking at it. So my interpretation of this, and I broke it into 2 parts. So the first is creating and sharing content. So that first part of the definition there. And then the second part, participate in social networking. So remember these because we're going to come back to that a lot throughout the episode. So 1, create and share content, and 2, participate in social networking. What makes a social media? My good friend Wikipedia, I went and visited Wikipedia, and shout out to the people that like are behind Wikipedia pages because man, they're doing the Lord's work. Like, wow. I don't know why Wikipedia gets such a bad rep, but like, it's interesting, man. There's so much good stuff on there. But anyway, here is where we get a little bit more specific. So what are some of the common features of social media? Social media are interactive, internet-based applications. So that's very similar to what we read in the Oxford Dictionary definition. Then on to the second feature, user-generated content such as text posts, comments, digital photos, videos, and data generated through online interactions. Then users create service-specific profiles for the website or app that are designed and maintained by the social media organization. So basically like your profile on Facebook, but then you also have like your profile, say on TikTok is different from that, or your profile on Snapchat or Be Real or whatever. So you are creating a platform-specific profile. And then the last one here. So social media helps the development of online social networks by connecting a user's profile with those of other individuals or groups. So connecting with people. So basically, like that's just a bit more of an expansion on what we read in the dictionary definition. We're seeing the 2 kind of things there again of creating and sharing content and participating in social networking. Now, maybe some of you can't remember a life before social media, or maybe the majority of your life you have been on social media now. But social media started actually in the mid-1990s. I was born in the early 1990s. Shout out to any other millennials listening. I don't know about you, but I don't remember social media in the 90s. I do remember some of my friends would be like on chat rooms, but that really freaked me out. And I was like, what do you mean you're talking to people you don't know? Like, how does that work? But then in the early 2000s, this is maybe when you also first remember social media, but that was like MySpace, Facebook, maybe Bebo, YouTube, Twitter. Those all kind of gained a bit of popularity in the 2000s. If you want to know a bit more about that, go back to my first episode. I did a little bit more of a deep dive on that. I actually used to really love MySpace. I loved like going online and like looking up the different bits of code to put into my MySpace profile. I used to put little like black and pink kind of decorations on there, made it all sparkly, put on like the music that I was listening to. It was very emo, very emo vibes. And I remember when I signed up for Facebook for the first time, I was like, what? What do you mean I can't change my background? What do you mean I can't customize this and make it look the way that I want it to look? And I think we lost an art when everybody switched to Facebook, because all of our profiles just basically became like super static. Anyway, back in those days, you used to have to use your computer to get onto social media, right? Like you used to log onto the computer in the evening. Again, if you're a 90s or even like late 90s kid as well, you probably remember having to like wait for your turn on the family computer to be able to go and log onto Facebook, and it was after school or in the weekend. And back then it was very much about connecting with your friends and sharing with them. And then we all started getting smartphones, and this is when social media really took off. But yeah, I'm going to come back to this in a bit. So we're not done talking about smartphones yet, because smartphones have really influenced social media even more. So now, almost 60% of the world's population is on social media. So that's almost 5 billion social media users. Okay, I rounded up, 4.76 apparently in Jan 2023. I think that's too far to round. When you're in the billions, you can't really just round up to the next billion in the same way. But anyway, so the top 5 most popular social networks in January 2024, and number 5 in 5th place is TikTok. 4th place, Instagram. 3rd place, WhatsApp, which I think is interesting because I don't really think of WhatsApp myself as a social media platform. I think of it as a messaging service. So that's also why I wanted to look at what's actually the features of social media and what makes it social media. Anyway, I digress. Back to number 2 is YouTube, and number 1 is Facebook. And if I think about talking to like my friends and what platforms they use, it's probably almost all in that same order, except for when it comes to number 1 of being Facebook. That's probably not up there anymore. I said to somebody the other day that I think that LinkedIn is now the millennial version of Facebook. I think a lot of like older generations are still using Facebook, whereas I think like millennials and younger have shifted to other platforms, and they use the channels in different ways. So like different formats, different types of posts, even when they're on the same platform, like Instagram, different generations are using it differently as well, and they're sharing things differently. And also, LinkedIn doesn't even make it in the top 10, which I think is quite funny, because especially for us marketers, maybe we think of LinkedIn as like quite high up there, but yeah, on a global scale, it's not. And for many people, social platforms are now primarily entertainment platforms. Behavior is changing, and more people are lurking on social media, but not necessarily engaging in the same way. So they're not leaving comments, they're not liking your post, but they're still seeing it, they're still scrolling through it, and they're also reading comments as well. They're reading comments and they're also sharing posts. So not necessarily reposting posts, but they're sharing posts as well. I'm going to come back to this some more, because those things I think are some key points. And I've talked about this in a couple of my other episodes as well, but I just think it's so fascinating hearing about how other people use it. And I'm going to get to it in a second. But one of the underlying things of this is now people don't know what to post on feed anymore, because the way that we're using the platforms is very different. So it used to be very much about just casual posting or uploading a full album of pictures after a night out. But there's so much more content creation and curation, and we're consuming it, but we're not just casually posting anymore. I actually think that almost everyone who posts on social media is basically a micro-influencer now. And now we're seeing the shift in the social media definition away from one of those parts, which was the social networking side of things, more towards the content creation side of things. And I think that this is such a wild statistic that I am about to read out. So brace yourselves for this. Get a pen and paper ready to write down this number, because it's wild. 40% of respondents in this survey between the ages of 18 and 44 years old describe themselves as video content creators. 40% of people. Those people are making memes, they're sharing commentary, they're creating content for fandoms. It's not just that they're posting updates for their friends and family anymore, they're creating content. This is actually a really big deal for brands, because Back in the day, people were just like posting random stuff. They weren't really creating content. And I put it in my little bunny ears, like they weren't creating content in the same way that they are now. But now there's even more noise out there for brands to compete against in the social space. And more influencers are also paying to promote their content. So brands aren't the only ones that are just boosting their content with ads. I have been posting some content on TikTok and I'm constantly getting like asked to promote my stuff and getting shown little examples of what it would look like to promote my content. So I think it's much more important for brands to really try and connect with their audiences online on social media because there is so much competition. You can't just be putting noise out there. I think for B2B and B2C, like all marketers, I think it's a busy space, and that's a big way to cut through a lot of the noise, is to really build that connection, which is definitely, it's easier said than done. And I know that influencers have been like I think every year they get bigger and bigger. But I really think that this is why it's so important for brands to start thinking about influencer partnerships if they haven't done yet. Because instead of trying to compete with these influencers for their audience's attention, you can actually like work with them to reach their audience. And those people, they're spending all the time like building that audience and building that community. You can tap into that by doing influencer campaigns as well. They already have that community and that network that trusts them. So that's a really quick way to reach that audience if you work with the right influencer as well. We haven't seen it as much yet, but we're definitely going to see it much more this year in the B2B space. And I think already, like I personally have seen a lot of people doing like partnerships, and we're going to see much more on LinkedIn from B2B influencers. It's going to happen quite quickly, I think, as well. That it's going to be a bit of a snowball effect. But anyway, back to the evolution of social media. So there are two main things that stand out to me too. I feel like I'm on like a Sesame Street episode where it's like, this episode is brought to you by the number 2 or like whatever. So why we're really seeing the evolution and adoption of social media over time. So two things that stand out to me. One, the rise of smartphones. So we're always on. We always have access to social media. So we're not just waiting for the computer at home in the evenings like we used to do back in the 2000s or 2010s, but now we can get on social media anytime, anywhere. And the second part, content creation. So we're not just posting statuses like we used to do on Facebook where it was like, Victoria is tired, or Victoria just ate lunch. Like those really basic, means nothing kind of posts like we used to just do all the time. But now we're seeing actual production quality content coming from normal people, and it's edited, it's thought out, it's curated, it's actual content creation. So smartphones. I'm actually recording on a smartphone now. I don't know what we would do without smartphones, to be honest, anymore. They're attributed to the adoption of social media, and I think that is pretty clear why. But I think they've also sped up the rise of content creation too. So it's much easier now because we can create content with a smartphone. It's way easier than it used to be. Like I said, I'm recording this podcast literally on my iPhone. That's what's filming me right now. So it's way easier than it used to be. You don't need fancy equipment anymore. You can record super high quality video. You can take amazing photos. You can edit everything on your phone too, and you can do it quickly and without the need to use camera equipment or expensive editing software. So now anybody with a smartphone can be a content creator. The barrier to entry is way lower, but also the output expectation is way higher too, because it's not just professionals that can create amazing content. It's your friends and family as well. So you feel like you have to keep up as well. It's almost like that keeping up with the Joneses that we experience on social media, but on another level as well, where it's like the actual quality of what you're putting online as well. So people are putting more effort into their posts, and they're curating and really thinking about what is being posted. Like the thought of posting something to feed really feels much more significant, whereas in the past, this was the only way to post. I don't know if you were on Instagram before stories, but you used to only be able to post to feed. You didn't have disappearing stories. So if you wanted to post something, you were posting your random updates to feed. And the way that we communicate on social media is changing too. We used to post on each other's walls. I don't know if you remember like back in those days, but now communication often happens almost like behind closed doors. It happens in messages, like sending each other videos on TikTok or Instagram. And we're able to stay much more connected as well. So things like group chats with friends and family, video calling. So like we talked about WhatsApp a little bit before. I talked about WhatsApp a bit before. But these things, we weren't able to do that a decade ago. And now social media means that we can stay connected even when we're ages away from each other. We can communicate in short bursts. So it doesn't have to be like a long phone call. It can be a short voice note. It can be a meme. It can be a video. And we're really seeing that now, coming back to the definition we talked about at the start of the episode, these two separate parts of creating and sharing content and participating in social networking, that the participating in the social networking now is not necessarily linked to the creating of content, but also actually just the sharing of content. So now it's almost like the definition is like splitting into three even more. From a brand point of view, this is something to think about, because back in the day, I probably would have tagged somebody in the comments if I saw something that I thought was really interesting for them. But now I would way rather just send it to them in a message or forward it to them like in platform, or I would take a screenshot, or I would copy the link and then paste it in another platform like Messenger or WhatsApp. This is why I think for marketers, especially in the next couple of years, we need to think about how we measure the success of things. I think that on TikTok, I think it's really cool that you can see the number of times a post has been shared or like sent to somebody. And I also think that on Instagram and TikTok, how you can see like the number of saves, I think that's really cool as well, because I think we're going to be needing to think about how we measure success and the impact of content on a bigger scale than just comments and likes and even followers in a certain kind of sense as well. So I know that these are vanity metrics and like, oh, shame on me for even talking about likes and comments, but like, let's be honest, like literally we all look at likes and comments when we post something. We're probably not setting goals for ourselves, but we're still using likes and comments as an indication of how well they're posted. But especially one of the things that we're talking a lot about in B2B is this zero-click content where you create value in app. So if we're doing that, and people are like consuming content there, we're not getting necessarily links out to a website. People probably aren't commenting on it. People don't necessarily like it, but they're still consuming it. We need to think about our goals, and we need to think about playing the long game rather than really trying to track these vanity metrics that are going to become even more misleading as well, thinking about the way that people are sharing content. So I want to drill down a little bit more into the content creation side of things, because this is why I really think that social media isn't what it used to be, and why I think people are saying that social media is dead when it's not. It's just becoming a crab. That's what we have agreed. Social media is becoming a crab. That can maybe be my next hat. If you would like a hat that says social media is becoming a crab, send me a message. The first person that does that, I'll send you out a hat. Yeah, send me a message. So back in the day, we had just normal everyday people on the apps like us, and then brands started joining. And I think this is really a key point, is that brands weren't always on social media. Like it wasn't just like from day one, like brands were on there and just doing what they do. Back in 2013, I was doing my university studies and I was studying marketing and also retail. So my final thesis at the end of the year, I was actually really encouraging small retailers to adopt social media, because a lot of them weren't using it, which you can't even imagine that now. But at the start, it was really about people connecting like with their friends. And I actually wrote this in my thesis. I want to include it because I'm like, whoa, I was really smart back then when I was 21. What happened? But basically I wrote, okay, ready, dramatic reading. Increases in technology do not have to mean less contact with people. It simply means the way in which we communicate is changing as content becomes immediate and constant. And it's so funny because back then, I don't think that we could imagine like where we've got to today. But along with this, we're seeing also a third group of users, which now I think it just feels so normal to us, but it's the content creators or the influencers. And they weren't there at the start. This is a very new thing. And I looked up a study of like dream jobs. In 2021, this survey by YouGov, if you haven't looked at YouGov before, there's always like super interesting surveys on this, but basically becoming a YouTuber, streamer, or vlogger made the top 5 for the teenagers that they surveyed. So for boys, in first place of like their dream job, so 12% had professional athlete as their preferred job, and then 11% wanted to become an online content creator. And then for girls, 13% of teenage girls wanted to become a medical professional, while streamer was in 5th place for girls. So with 6% of teenage girls wanting to become a streamer. And then before that, it went actress, musician, and artist. So medical professional, actress, musician, artist, and then streamer. And then if we look back 6 years ago, there was a similar survey that they did in 2015. And back then, for all of the kids, like the most popular career was working in STEM. And then also after STEM was working in health and care roles. And then being a professional sports person, and then working behind the scenes in creative industries. So probably even like the closest one to being a streamer was that working in the creative industries. But one of the things that kind of stood out to me though on that list as well was that kids are wanting to become more entertainers. So thinking about like sports, like athletes, but also there's like the art, musician, but then there's also like the actress, streaming, YouTuber as well. Like, why is this? Is that maybe it's not just like a faraway dream, becoming like a Hollywood actress or something like that, or a musician signed to a massive label. When we were growing up in like the 2000s, that was probably much more difficult to achieve. Whereas for a lot of kids these days, like I talked about before with like technology and smartphones, is much more attainable, and it's something that they can probably actually see there's a way that they can get to that as well. And like the barrier to being a streamer is way lower than it is like to become a doctor, which is, it sounds super weird thing to say like in a sentence, but literally like anybody could become a streamer if you wanted to. And that's not saying everybody could be a successful streamer. I don't think it's that simple, but if you wanted to be a streamer, like you literally could do that. And so I think this is going to have a really significant impact on work in the future, and especially for marketers. There's going to be so many more people that are like content creators out there in the world as well. And I think that makes a big opportunity for marketers to partner up with these people. Again, thinking not just about the audiences that they are creating and the network, the community they're creating over like the years that they're building their platform, but also the skills that they have as well, the content creation skills, and being able to create content that resonates with the audience. So partnering up with influencers is only going to become more important for all marketers, no matter whether they're in B2B or B2C or D2C. Like I mentioned before, different generations are using different platforms, and online spaces like Roblox and Fortnite are huge for younger generations. And this is something that Coco Moco, who hosts a podcast Ahead of the Curve, she's talked about a lot as well, but especially on these platforms, it's not your face or your real name that you're using. And these younger generations are using personas or aliases online. So thinking back, like at the start, we were talking about social networks, they're profiles that you create on these platforms. And for us, like on the platforms that we use, maybe we've had these profiles since we were in high school or when we're in university. So we've got like this real identity of ourselves out in the world. Whereas these younger generations, they're probably not going to have that in the same way that we have. But the mainstream social media platforms that we use, they're all feature stealing from each other. So thinking about those like the big names, they're all evolving into the same form of crab. I don't think that this crab reference was going to work, but they're all heading towards the crab body that inevitably we all will end up with. So Until Be Real had brands and influencers just a few weeks ago. They were one of probably the most unique, popular platforms. With every new feature that is being added, we're seeing these platforms are becoming more and more similar. So they're also now, like for Be Real, becoming a place for influencers and brands too, whereas before they weren't really like as dominant on that platform. But for example, so Be Real, it used to be just about seeing your friends, but now the platform has kind of, I will say, fundamentally changed from what its original mission was, which is like they had this written in their bio, I put it in quotation marks here in my notes, just your friends for real. So this was a thing that they mentioned like a few times as well. And now they've added brands and influencers to their platform. Before that, the content on there felt real and authentic because it was like real people. It was your friends. And obviously, of course, there's always a bit of curation on there, but It just felt a bit more like in the moment, but now it's changed. Brands, influencers joining that one too. And even channels like LinkedIn. So before that, we used to really use it more for networking, maybe job hunting, adding somebody that you met at a network event, or when you move to a new city and trying to connect with people. But that's really now become a place for content creators and influencers. And you also see the addition of various levels of badges. So like the LinkedIn top voices, but now also the kind of category experts as well. And there's also now identity verification badges and even tools like post scheduling, which what normal person needs to schedule a post. Like that is really for like people that are content creators. So social media has really changed from being this place where we would just post these random updates like I just ate a sandwich to now being a place where there's these really separate uses of social media, where it's connecting with friends and family in messages, not in the really like public visible space anymore, to also being like an entertainment platform where everything is really public and it's very visible and everybody is seeing it. And also now social media is where we're looking for jobs, or also where people are making money as well. I think, again, this episode is brought to you by the number 2. So there are 2 camps of people, and those are, I think, there are creators and there are consumers. And I think that there used to be more of a mix where everybody would have a little bit of everything, but now the behaviors are becoming much more separate. And I think it's no wonder that people are starting to feel burned out by social media, and more people are dipping out of social media, or they're lurking, or they're just feeling really disenfranchised by the whole thing. Before, it used to feel more natural and real, and the stakes weren't high. That's why you could post these stupid status updates, or you could post this big album of photos. Like the stakes weren't high. You were allowed to just be silly. But now it really feels like a product. And we're also seeing people leave the platforms altogether. I'm sure that you probably aren't on every single platform. Maybe some of you aren't on Facebook or Instagram anymore. I think Instagram is a great example, because I also know a lot of people my age that have either never had Instagram, or they had Instagram and then left it, which to me is wild, because I have been chronically on Instagram since I got it in 2011. And I have literally probably done 5,000 feed posts. But I think that, again, what I want to emphasize here is it's really important that you understand how this behavior is changing for your audience as marketers, because your audience won't always be on the same channel it currently is on. Although we say, and I say this often as well, is like start with one channel and then do that really well and grow from there. I think it's really crucial to emphasize that the grow from there part. Do not ever just be reliant on just one channel to reach your audience, especially if it's not a channel that you own, because look at like X, the artist formerly known as Twitter. That's a really great example. It's like if you built your audience on there, if something happens with that channel that you're not in control of and your audience leaves. I think as marketers, thinking about social media as one part of your marketing mix, like your whole audience, the way that you communicate with them should never be on just one platform or one channel. I think having another way that you can reach them, another kind of social network platform or a newsletter, for example. And one thing that I haven't touched on yet is how content is served to us too. This has also evolved. So back when we were first on social media back in the day, we would only really see content from our friends or the pages that we chose to follow. But now we also see a lot of suggested content, or discover or explore, whatever you want to call it, depending on what platform you're on. And this is thanks to the algorithm. And there's this great scene from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I'm not sure if you've seen that show. It's on Netflix. But one of the main characters, Titus, he says this great quote. I don't think about it often. He says, "You know how Al Gore invented the internet? Well, he also invented a rhythm for it. It's a powerful rhythm. It's called the Al Gore rhythm." And anytime anyone says algorithm, that's what I think about, the Al Gore rhythm. But basically what starts to happen is that we end up in these kind of echo chambers, and it can feel like we're seeing the same stuff on every platform from lots of different people. And especially with viral trends, you see this same kind of thing on all of your different channels and different accounts too. I love always the jokes about like when something goes viral on TikTok, and be like, oh, Reels users seeing this in a few weeks. It's not platform specific anymore. We're seeing a lot of the same stuff everywhere. People jump on these trends, and they jump especially on these viral trends, and you see it on lots of different channels, because people want to get big followings because there's that potential to make a lot of money or feel like make sales or be successful. So I'm going to just go tangential here, but I remember back in the day when I had my gardening account on Instagram, so this was back in like the 2010s, there would be these PR kind of drops where influencers would be sent the same thing. So you'd see like on your feed, the people that you were following, you'd see the same product like all at the same time. And I remember there were some people who weren't included in that drop, and you know that they weren't included in that drop, but they would go out and buy that product as soon as they could and then post about it to make it seem like they were a part of it. But it's kind of, shows like what's happening with this evolution of social media, where it's like you can portray this thing of being successful because you're posting the same kind of stuff as other people. So stuff becomes much more like similar. And I think also if you're on LinkedIn, you're probably seeing the same kind of stuff happening there as well. People posting about the same kind of topics or talking about the same kind of topics. But I think that we're going to see this happening. I shouldn't laugh. Maybe I will laugh a little bit because it is like, that we're going to see this. We're like, there's going to be a few kind of like brand deals happening with influencers, like in the B2B space with like tools. For sure this is going to happen. And there'll be this campaign where they're like partner and then they'll post about it and do whatever. I'm sure that there'll be other people that pretend that they're also like a part of that partnership so that they seem successful and they're part of this. So I think that we'll see that ripple effect as well. I just think that's funny, but we're going to see that this year for sure. But I think at the end of the day, everything that I've been talking about, what it comes back to is that social media, it used to feel the same for everyone in that it was like a place for us to share photos or connect with our friends or post weird statuses or post things on our friends' walls. But now it's become something that we get entertainment, where some of us work on there, we make money on there, or we try and make a name for ourselves, or we close deals, or we try and find a new job. It's become so much more serious. There's so much more at stake on these platforms and on these channels. It's not just silly, but you can be seeing something so serious on one platform, on one channel. You swipe and then it's something so silly. I was also thinking, remember when everybody worked together to make that egg go viral on, wait, hold on. I needed to say it properly with my accent because people aren't going to understand otherwise. That egg, like the egg, like the food, the egg, like we made that egg go viral. I just think that's so funny. And that to me is like that's what social media was created for, to make an egg go viral. So in summary, social media isn't dying. It's just getting closer to becoming a crab like we all are. And maybe some platforms are already closer to becoming a crab than others. And it's important that as marketers, we keep an eye on what's happening because it is important to us, especially in this day and age of like, how are we going to reach our audience and what do they care about and where are they? But before I get into my little wrap up of this episode, I'm going to get into my final part of my episode, which is my segment, which is things I'm thinking about this week, in brackets, no action required. And I have been watching a lot of old 80s and 90s movies. Shout out to Google TV. I've actually been able to find some really cool, this is not sponsored. I'm not pretending that I'm being sponsored by Google TV right now, hashtag fake influencer, but I've been able to find movies and TV shows on there that haven't been able to find on other streaming services before. Like they're never served to me. And I think also, this is just a side note, like this algorithm, right? Like on those other platforms, they are trying to tell me what things I want to watch. Whereas on the Google TV, like they can serve me the actual thing that I want to find. But anyway, I digress. So I've been watching a lot of these like 80s and 90s movies and they are so unserious. Like it is so brilliant. And maybe at the time they were supposed to be a little bit more serious, but with time they've just become like unserious. But even the pace of them is so different. Like they're slower and there's not as much that's happening. I watched some really great ones like Clue, Little Shop of Horrors. I watched one the other night called Death Becomes Her. There's so many really great 80s and 90s movies that I literally had never heard of before. And I just think that it's really great to watch something that's not another superhero movie. So that's what I've just been thinking about this week. But anyway, that is it for the Super Fun Marketing Podcast this week, and I want to hear from you. Are you a social poster or are you a social consumer? What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to start seeing these like fake influencers coming up when other brand deals are happening? Or are we all starting to become crabs? I don't know. Let me know what you think. But yeah, have a great week, and I will see you guys next Tuesday on the Super Fun Marketing Podcast.